you know, around 7 cents maybe, which is still pretty low. Yes?
Under the topic of 2009 trends, you said 13 states have introduced legislation and something thinking it said something about adding new resources. Could you elaborate a little bit about
Yeah, well, one thing states are looking at is diversifying what they classify as renewable. So they have tiered resources where they might say, well, we only will allow a certain percentage of this. We don't want you to have, say, municipal solid waste incineration. They don't want to have a big chunk coming from that. So they might allow a little bit of that, or they might allow a little bit of certain other types of resources. One thing that's added, for instance, is combined heat and power. So if you have an existing power plant, say a coal-fired power plant where the excess heat is just going off into the air, if they added new technology that captures that heat, either runs it through another turbine to generate more electricity, or utilizes that heat to heat buildings, then that can actually count towards the RPS. Yes?
I read an article recently on Germany's feed-in tariff idea. And as I understood it, there's a guaranteed contract. So if you're the investor, you know you're going to have a reasonable rate of return, right? Mm-hmm. And the feed-in tariff, as I understand it, was that they were paid just a little bit more, and that cost them was spread out over all the ratepayers. Yes. But it was kind of an incentive, to encourage private capital and entrepreneurs to get involved. Which you'd think, free market folks would just love dearly, because it wasn't necessarily government. I mean, I guess there was some sort of law that made that possible, but why would that not work with small wind-based? We had a speaker here on community-based energy development. Some small wind installation that a community puts in. That would be something. I don't know. I like the idea of feed-in tariff. It looked like it was. Yeah, and it excited entrepreneurs.
They've looked at it in Michigan. They've introduced policy or legislation there to look at it in Michigan. A number of states have actually introduced policy just to explore it. How would it work here? And yes, it certainly can be applied to small wind. It can be applied to any type of renewable energy generation. And really, what it does is, some argue that it's better than a renewable portfolio standard in that prices, the amount of money that, say, the utility or the producer of renewable energy gets is determined by these renewable energy credit prices, which fluctuate with the market. So their compensation isn't, 100% predictable, whereas with the feed-in tariff, it's set for 20 years. They know exactly how much they're going to get. Or maybe not 20 years, 15, whatever they decide to set it at. So they can, it's a much more solid number and much more predictable.
Reduces the risk of the investment.
Exactly, and so they can do better calculations. And then what they do is every 2 years or so, they assess how much our installation costs, how much is solar, and what they target is a 5% return on investment. So, and then they adjust it, so it just goes down, the feed-in tariff, and I think it's almost 40 cents. The kilowatt hour in Germany, but it's been going down, and that's due to the decrease in cost. And eventually they hope to get rid of it.
Ideologically, does that satisfy folks that don't like government getting involved in giving incentives and tax credits, tax money giveaway? Does that?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, it's really personal preference, and it still increases costs. They've seen. I can't remember the exact number, but it's somewhere between 2 and 4 euros, maybe up to 5 per month increase. So that's pretty significant. And I don't think the U.S. would necessarily, many ratepayers would be necessarily all that happy with that. But solar isn't the most efficient renewable energy technology in a cloudy climate, especially when it could be when it becomes less expensive, but it's still pretty expensive. So that might be part of the reason it's, the bang for the buck issue may not be as high. And some people say, well, that's what they wanted. They were willing to pay it, and so that worked for their market. Yes.
Well, one of the interesting things that's not on this graph is the economic development that it brings to Iowa in terms of those manufacturing plants, investment in the local economies and all those kinds of things. So just the fact that Iowa's doing all that with wind, there's all kinds, if somehow you could put that on the curve, it would show a real economic development.
Yeah, and I think
in the state.
there is the other issue. Okay, so they have this added incentive, but you might look at, well, what was the cost of building a new natural gas-fired power plant, and what were the concerns of, well, what if we do have a carbon cap at some point in the future, which is, as many people think is probable, that might, increase the value of having low carbon energy source. So I think a lot of people are looking towards the future that in the next couple of years, there's likely to be a price, a signal for carbon, whether it be carbon tax, most likely it seems like a carbon cap and trade type of thing. But I think a lot of, or even if it's not, a lot of investors and just consumers don't want it, so they don't want to support that, or they want to support renewables, and they're willing to pay a little bit more for it, possibly. And they might not have to, as they come down, and the fact that natural gas prices might spike again. So that's another concern. Yes?
Why you talk about the 5% return on investment that feed-in tariffs had? At least that was the original target. I think the idea, at least in Europe, is that you drive the price down because people are getting a fixed rate, and they say, hey, if I can generate it at this cost instead of, as I can move it down even more, I got more margin to work with, I'm making more profits off of this. And so there's a constant push to get the price down with the feed.
Exactly. So they're
whereas if you're just doing a percentage, well, then it's like, well, whatever's available.
Yeah, that's true. They do drive it down,
difference.
and that drives innovation and encourages installers to be more efficient and designers. And
Just a follow-up point. One of the things that when Spain put their feed-in tariff in, as I recall, they were very worried because, well, okay, we put this feed-in tariff in, but we're going to buy all the machines from Germany and from Denmark. So as part of their feed-in tariff, as I recall, they put a requirement in that it would only be applied toward manufacturing that was done in Spain, which is part of the reason that their whole manufacturing capability took off like a rocket.
Yeah, and a lot of renewable portfolio standards require that the majority of energy produced must be produced within the state. Obviously, that may increase the costs because there may be cheap resources in a neighboring state that are already tapped, but
you mean manufactured in the state? That was the point I was giving you.
Well, I'm talking generate. Yeah, I'm talking this generate. The generation has to be built within the state, so that's generated within the state. Manufacturing, I'm not so sure what if there's that many requirements with regards to RPS.
I think that was the thing that was different in Spain, though,
yeah,
because they wanted to capture that and recycle all that.
Yeah, and they've really become a leader in concentrating solar power, and Iberdrola is one of the biggest companies now in that area, and actually doing a lot of builds in the U.S. and the Southwest. So, yes.
Since Nebraska is a 100% public power state, the bond financing that the utilities here have to pay in order to build an in-kind power plant, they should be able to get that financing cheaper than if it were a comparable electric investor-owned utility borrowing the same amount of money to build the same power plant, which would seem to give Nebraska utilities an advantage when we're talking about renewable. So I guess my question is, have you looked at things like wind energy, and on a ballpark basis, how much of the lifetime cost of that power is those upfront costs of the capital versus the operating and maintenance over the years?
No, I haven't. I know that the maintenance is fairly low. I mean, there's definitely maintenance costs, and sometimes the turbines burn out, and there needs to be adjustments every couple months. Sometimes, I mean, it depends. They're becoming more and more reliable, actually, and less maintenance.